pleased to kick off today's masterclass session. My name is Tom Goldsby, and I'll be serving as your host. I'm a professor at the University of Tennessee in beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee. I also serve as the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Business Logistics, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Jackson Bilbrey. Jackson serves as the Vice President of Professional Services at Kerber Supply Chain. He's been with Kerber for 10 years, most of which he's been assigned to the product management division. And prior to joining Kerber, he worked on the user side of the equation with an auto parts distribution business. So welcome, Jackson.
Hello, Tom.
Hey, I'm going to turn things over to you in just a few minutes, but please allow me to go over a few things with the audience just to set the stage. Again, some of you are perhaps returning guests and know the routine, and others are perhaps new to us. We've been really pleased with the fact that we're getting a worldwide viewing audience for these masterclass sessions. So good day or good evening, depending upon where you're reaching us today. But let me establish why we're here. We're here to tackle the challenges of today's increasingly complex supply chain, bringing you the best practices from innovative thinking of academics like myself, as well as industry insiders and senior leaders like Jackson. What we're trying to accomplish, we want to provide guidance and insights to managing your supply chain as a competitive advantage, perhaps even establishing a competitive advantage through excellence in the supply chain. But we want to try to conquer that increasing complexity that we're all seeing and the rate of change that is just unprecedented out there. As indicated, this is the third session in this particular masterclass. We have a couple more sessions to go. But if you've missed any of our previous sessions in the masterclass or would like to review this session at a later time, all of our sessions are recorded and available on demand. And I just point out that you can also access the sessions from previous masterclass series on addressing labor challenges and cold storage trends. So let's go over some quick housekeeping items, and we'll get into today's topic. First of all of your phone lines are muted out there, so you don't have to worry about any outside noise. You can relax, enjoy yourself, and get informed with today's session. And keep in mind that this session is being recorded for later viewing. We do welcome your input. So if you have any questions, the questions tab is where you want to go in the GoToWebinar menu. And I'd also direct you to the handout tab where we have another complimentary white paper available that goes right along with our session today. Today's white paper is titled Holistic Supply Chain, an End-to-End Provider is Essential, brought to you by the marketing group at Kerber Supply Chain. So we really thank them for coming up with timely news we can use in addition to this session in these white papers. Hey, let's take a look at today's poll results. And the question was, again, how well have previous implementations matched your expectations? And more than half of you, 55%, indicated that these supply chain technology implementations had matched expectations. And then we start to see it's kind of what we call a bell-shaped curve, kind of a normal distribution around that median point. 14% indicated that the implementations had exceeded expectations, and 18% indicated somewhat less than expectations. And then at the extremes, 9% indicated that those implementations had greatly exceeded expectations, and the remaining 5% indicated much less than expected. So Jackson, some interesting findings for us to build upon. And that is about as normal a distribution as you could ever hope to see. So it gives us a sense for the kind of the disparity in experiences that people have as they look to implement advanced technologies. So with that, thanks to everyone for completing the poll. Let's go ahead and set the stage. And you know, with regard to those of you, I guess 23% that indicated that previous technologies had not met expectations, I suppose there's any number of reasons why that might happen. And here I offer 6 common explanations for why projects of any kind might fall short of expectations. And perhaps you can identify with some of these. You might be going down through the list and doing a little check of those items that you can identify with, whether it's poor project definition and plan, poor project management discipline, a lack of executive level support, no linkage to the business strategy, lacking training across the organization, or insufficient resources or budget. And mind you, I came up with this list. When I'm teaching project management, these are common reasons why I see failure of projects of any kind, any walk of life. However, what Jackson's going to illuminate for us today are why projects in the IT, supply chain IT domain sometimes go off the rails. And we're going to have the benefit of learning from Jackson's countless implementations. Myself, I was the younger of two brothers growing up, and I made a point at every opportunity to learn from the mistakes of my big brother, so that I didn't have to repeat those painful experiences. And I guess, Jackson, we're going to look to you today as our big brother here. Again, you've got immense experience in implementing technologies of all kinds, and we're going to focus in on WMS in particular today. But how can we avoid these pitfalls and get to ROI on our WMS implementations quicker with more certainty?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So, we're going to focus on 5 different areas that we've seen companies that are great implementers of new technology and some of the things that they do to make those projects succeed. If you advance the slide, one slide, please. So the first place we're going to talk about is internal alignment. If you really think about any type of technology solution that you're implementing, whether it's a new WMS, a shipping system, or an ERP, the earlier that your team can take ownership of that implementation of that solution, the greater level of success you'll have. And what I mean is, most implementation teams or most software providers, when they have a purchase happen, they do an internal handoff between the sales team and the implementation team to make sure that those two teams are in sync. And internally, you should be doing the same thing as well. Because often what we see is that the same team that was the buying team is not necessarily fully the same team that's implementing. So what are some of the pieces that the overall team needs to understand to make sure that this implementation will be a success? Well, I think if you focus on things like, first of all, why are we out looking for a new WMS solution or our first WMS solution? Making sure that the team understands the why we were out. And then if you're at the point where you've already chosen a solution, why'd you select that specific solution? What were the points that drew you to that solution? What were the criteria, whether it had been certain functions and features, whether it had been something that delivered the customer a certain experience at the end, your customer a certain experience at the end. What were the ROI scenarios used for that selection process? That's really the key fundamental information that the team needs to understand in order to be successful throughout the project. They can then build upon that information and understand what the definition of success is. And one of the things that we see when projects go off the rails, to Tom's point, is when the expectations of the entire organization or all the stakeholders don't line up with the team that is implementing that solution. That could be in total or in part. Maybe the implementation team is only made up of the operations team, and they forget what the customer is expecting when those boxes show up to their house, or they're not sure what the executive team is expecting to glean from the information that's collected from your WMS system. So understanding all those critical points from each stakeholder in the process is key to being able to deliver a successful solution to your company at the end of the project. Some other points to consider is, as you're out there gathering members of the team, make sure that they understand the time requirements of them. That could be anywhere from a subject matter expert, where it's just as needed, a few hours here, a few hours there, to a project lead internally that it really is a full-time job. So setting those expectations of time requirements is key. Also, is there seasonality or calendar constraints that your business has that the team needs to know about to either get the WMS solution that you selected working before that time frame, or to make sure that the WMS solution is done with testing and ready to go live after that maybe a peak season, so that you have a full couple months or half a year off peak that you get to run and learn the WMS at a lower volume. And then the last piece is taking into consideration any third-party integrations you may have, like a host system, EDI, shopping carts, or automation. Make sure that the team understands that. And that takes us straight into the next area, which is really our solution definition. So the first thing that's important in solution definition is making sure that the resources needed both internally and externally are available. So those internal people that you identified and made sure that they understood the project, they now need to be available to the external teams. And I say external teams because this is also an area where we see projects tend to go off the rails. You get a WMS solution and you're putting it in, and you have say the ERP expertise in-house. Well, we have 2 of maybe 5 or 10 different systems that fully make up the ecosystem now represented at the table. So you need to make sure that if there is some automation, if there's EDI, if there's a shopping cart integration, that you also have those experts available to the team that's implementing the solution, so that you have a full understanding of what the total ecosystem is going to look like once things have been implemented. So that moves us into our discovery or our definition phase of the project. And the first thing that you should expect is when this definition process or this define phase portion of the project is done, you should receive from your WMS solution provider a clear set of deliverables that allows you to not only read about, but also visualize how that system will operate once implemented. This is key to the next point on the slide, which is your team needs a solid understanding of what those deliverables, how those deliverables apply to their process of business. And what I mean by that is, if we take an example of a picker, so you have somebody come in and explain to your WMS solution team, here's what picking needs to do in our warehouse in order to meet all of the success factors from the stakeholders and deliver the customer experience. What they should then be able to do, if they have a solid understanding of what that deliverable is, without looking at a workflow, they should be able to describe to you, this is how the system is going to operate. These are the type of screens that I'm going to interface with, and these are the data points that I expect the system to ask me for during the process. That gives them a solid understanding of what the implementation is going to look like once things are done. Then what you want to do is you want to make sure that those deliverables, now that your team understands them, do they line up with the success criteria that you collected from all the stakeholders before? And that's key, because what you want to do with those success factors is now you are going to create definitions of each of those processes as they're completed and how those tie into your testing plan down the road. So again, a solid understanding of what the solution is going to do and how it is going to be interacted with is key coming out of your definition phase before the software starts to be configured and before you start to train. This brings us to our next key point that you can take control of in your implementation to make sure that you're getting the best experience and gaining that ROI quickly. And that's project cadence. This is one of the most overlooked areas in a successful implementation, because what happens is when things are going well, this is perceived as a waste of time. And then it is first revisited when things aren't going well. However, what we have seen through the most successful technical implementations and companies that are really great at implementing new technology is they follow this cadence religiously, whether the implementation is going well or poorly. So your first part of that cadence is a monthly cadence with your executive sponsors. And the things that should be covered in this cadence are understanding of project status on both sides. Do either of the teams have any impediments that are in their way? Are there concerns that we need to know about? And if there are concerns, what's our path to resolution to address those concerns? Our second level in that cadence cycle is our weekly cadence. And it's important that all people involved in the implementation, or all companies involved in the implementation, are represented in this weekly status. And that should be to go over things like, what were the tasks that were accomplished last week? What are the tasks that need to be accomplished this week? How are we trending towards budget? And are there any roadblocks that the team needs removed? Takes us into our final piece. You should be having a daily stand-up internally. What are the tasks that your company has to complete this week to make sure that the project continues to move on time and on budget? And do we understand what the definitions of done are, any unit testing, and any documentation that needs to be created along those task lines? And again, the key here is follow this cadence from the beginning of the project, no matter how the project's going, good or poor. Brings us to our next piece, training. User acceptance testing and training is among the most telltale signs of whether you're going to have a successful go live or an unsuccessful go live. And there's a few key pieces that you should do. First of all is you should have your plan defined before you ever start testing. And that plan should have clear definition of what success is that ties back to those definitions of done that ultimately tie back to your stakeholder criteria. And it should have multiple levels of testing. You should go through perfect path testing. This is if everything came through from the shopping cart to the host system to the WMS with all the information you needed, just transition through the WMS, a perfect pick process, packed and shipped out the door. That's the start of your testing. Then what you should do is get into some real world testing. What happens if the picker shows up to the pick bin and he shows up to pick bin, but when pick bin A, but when it was being replenished, the user accidentally scanned that into pick bin B. How do they deal with that? Definitely figure in some real world or some exception testing into your process. And if you don't know what to expect, don't be afraid to ask your WMS solution provider, what are the most common areas, common issues you see in each of the processes, and how can I work that into my training plan? Then once you've tested all of those different, whether it's picking, receiving, cycle counting, or any of the other functions in the warehouse, now test end to end. Information coming into your host system being passed down to the WMS, received in through the dock, put away into an overstock location, let down at some point, picked out onto an order, packed and shipped out the door, so that you can see the life cycle of that product move all the way through your WMS solution, as well as all the integrating systems, whether it be a host, an EDI solution, or an automation solution. Now let's talk about training a little bit. All solutions tend to do the super user training, and super user training is typically executed very well. So we'll spend very little time on a super user training other than make sure that your users understand super user training, because that is going to be key to that test plan getting executed. The next three areas are where there's variance that has to do with successful or unsuccessful implementations. First is end user training. Your super users should be doing the training of your users. This is key to taking ownership of your solution. However, your solution provider should absolutely be there to support you every step along the way. Again, make sure when you're doing that testing, you're doing that training, train your users. What happens if I get an exception? What happens if an order comes down and somebody sent it with the wrong ship via? How do you train that and how do you fix it? Administrative. A user locked themselves out of their handhold. How do I adjust it? Think of the things that would be absolutely detrimental if they happened when you're on the time clock and you have to get those orders out during go live, and make sure those are incorporated into your testing plan. And above all, your testing plan should be measurable. Make sure you're able to go back and measure against it. So a good rule of thumb is every user that's going to use that system should have executed about 20% of a daily volume of their practice. So if they're going to be picking 1,000 orders a day, they should have picked 200 lines in that system before you ever think about going live. That ensures that they know the system. So the last piece of our, the last factor that we should think about is project go live and post go live. First of all, you think you're ready to go live? Again, measurement is key. Make sure you go back and review that testing plan. Did I check all the boxes off? Did I meet all the success criteria for my testing plan? Training plan. Did my users meet the minimum level of training that I set forth for them? Make sure that you can measure that, whether it's by a dashboard in your solution, a report, or statistics that you capture some other way. But measuring your testing and your training plan are key to success. The next piece, when you're planning your go live or when you're planning your overall solution, make sure that you work in some time for an operational readiness test. If that's setting my go live for 7/21 and working back 3 weeks so that I can have a couple operational readiness tests, what these are is running tests at full volume next to the system you're running today. They're designed to do a couple things. One, they're designed to measure the system readiness at volume, your cutover plan, as well as measure your team's readiness at volume. A telltale sign here, if things are not ready, is you cut over and you're downloading 100,000 items and it's taking 10 hours instead of the 2 you planned. An adjustment needs to be made to the system there to get that data in. Another telltale sign, if you're out on the floor and a user or users are being presented with screens that they didn't expect and everybody is running to the same one person to get answers, that's a sign that you're not ready to go live. You want to see a collective answering group of all of the peers in the warehouse helping each other. That is a tale that you will have a successful go live. The last point that we'll make, and then we'll move into some of the questions, is continuous improvement. Again, you set these measurements of success, and they may have been daily pick volumes, monthly pick volumes, customer experience. They should be a measurable measure of success. So let's say in the first week or the first month, you want to be 80% of volume. Second month, you want to be 90%, and so on. What you should do is have predefined check-in points 30, 60, and 90 days out to see how you're performing against those measures of success that you put in place. Make adjustments if you needed, put those adjustments in place, and then check in at the next measurement point. So Tom, those are the main areas that we see where somebody implementing a technology solution can put some focus to make sure that they're going to either have the expectations they expected or exceed the expectations.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jackson. I think there's some